When people think about Rwanda today, they often recall images of violence and tragedy. However, it is important to first understand that this beautiful African country once had a very different story. Long before the horrors of 1994, Rwanda was a peaceful society, with people living together in relative harmony. Rwanda is located in Central East Africa. Before colonial times, Rwandans shared one language, one culture, and one set of traditions. There were three main groups of people: the Hutu, who were the majority, the Tutsi, who were fewer, and the Twa, a very small group who were among Rwanda's earliest inhabitants. These categories were not rigid or fixed. A person could be born Hutu and become Tutsi if they became wealthy enough or owned cattle, and a Tutsi could become Hutu if they lost wealth. The differences between Hutu and Tutsi were mostly about wealth and jobs, rather than deep racial or ethnic divides. Things began to change dramatically in the late 19th century when European colonial powers arrived. The first Europeans to claim Rwanda were the Germans. In 1884, Germany declared Rwanda and its neighbor Burundi as part of German East Africa. Although Germany did not heavily interfere with Rwanda's society, they made one very significant mistake. They believed the Tutsi were naturally superior because they were taller and seemed wealthier and better organized. German colonizers thought the Tutsi must have come from somewhere else, possibly Ethiopia, and labeled them a superior race. This idea was not based on facts, but on misguided and racist thinking. It started to shape how Europeans saw Rwanda and its people. Germans preferred to rule through local kings and chiefs, who were mostly Tutsi, because it was simpler and cheaper. By doing so, the Germans unknowingly began to harden the divide between Hutus and Tutsis. After World War I, Germany lost control of Rwanda, and Belgium took over in 1916. Belgium's rule was more direct, more intense, and much more harmful to Rwanda. The Belgian colonizers believed even more strongly than the Germans that the Tutsi were superior. They decided the Tutsi should have all the power, all the important jobs, and the best education opportunities. The Belgians deliberately encouraged divisions to keep the people separated and easier to control. In 1932, Belgium took a step that changed Rwanda forever. They introduced mandatory identity cards for every Rwandan. For the first time, these cards officially categorized each person as Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. From this moment, people could no longer move between groups. Their identity was fixed at birth, making what was once flexible into something permanent and dangerous. With identity cards in place, Tutsis gained even greater privileges. They had better schools, better jobs, and control of the government, all supported by Belgian authority. On the other hand, Hutus became more and more frustrated, feeling oppressed and excluded from their own country's leadership. This anger and resentment simmered slowly, building pressure beneath the surface of society. This forced division had catastrophic consequences. Before the Europeans, Rwandan identity was about shared values and community. But now, identity was defined strictly by ethnic labels on a government-issued card, a concept totally alien to traditional Rwandan society. By the 1950s, European colonies across Africa were seeking independence. Rwanda, too, was ready to move beyond colonial rule. However, as independence approached, Belgium made a sudden and dramatic shift in its policy. Fearing a revolution led by Tutsi elites who wanted independence, Belgium turned its back on the Tutsi minority. Instead, they threw their support behind the Hutu majority, who were understandably eager to gain power and correct years of unfair treatment. This rapid change ignited explosive tensions. In 1959, violence broke out between the Hutu majority and the Tutsi elite. This uprising, known as the Hutu Peasant Revolution, was brutal. Thousands of Tutsis were killed, and hundreds of thousands fled the country, seeking safety in neighboring lands. Those who remained faced severe discrimination and violence. By 1962, Rwanda finally achieved independence. But this independence came at a high cost. Rwanda was now a country deeply divided. A new government, led by Hutu politicians, began to systematically discriminate against Tutsis. Tutsis were excluded from good jobs, their children were denied proper education, and many faced violence simply for being Tutsi. After independence, Rwanda was led by a Hutu government under President Gregoire Kayibanda. Instead of promoting unity, the new government intensified divisions. They created laws explicitly targeting Tutsis, denying them opportunities to work in government positions or pursue higher education. For instance, the number of Tutsi students allowed in universities was deliberately limited, ensuring they would remain marginalized. This approach further isolated Tutsis, making them feel like outsiders in their own country. During this period, a dangerous ideology called Hutu power emerged. It was a hateful way of thinking that portrayed Tutsis not just as rivals, but as threats to Rwanda. Hutu power followers falsely claimed Tutsis were foreigners who had invaded Rwanda long ago. Such ideas were promoted through schools, government speeches, and local gatherings, creating widespread mistrust and hostility. By 1973, Rwanda faced another turning point. General Juvenal Habyarimana, a Hutu, overthrew President Kayibanda in a military coup. Initially, some people hoped Habyarimana would heal the country's divisions, but he only deepened them further. He set up a one-party state, meaning everyone had to belong to his political party to participate in society. This party openly favored Hutus, leaving Tutsis increasingly powerless and vulnerable. Under Habyarimana's leadership, anti-Tutsi discrimination became even more severe. Hate speech against Tutsis became common in media and politics. Newspapers and radio stations started to broadcast messages accusing Tutsis of plotting to regain control and oppress the Hutu majority. Tutsis were now publicly portrayed as dangerous enemies rather than fellow citizens. The growing tensions forced many Tutsis to flee Rwanda, seeking safety in neighboring countries like Uganda, Burundi, and Tanzania. By the 1980s, these refugees desperately wanted to return home, but faced a government that refused to welcome them back. Feeling they had no other choice, some exiled Tutsis formed a military group called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF. Their goal was clear: to fight for the right to return home. In October 1990, the RPF launched its first attack against Habyarimana's government, marking the start of the Rwandan Civil War. This fighting forced thousands of people to flee their homes, causing widespread fear and insecurity. Instead of addressing the underlying problems, the government used this opportunity to spread even more hateful propaganda. They accused all Tutsis, even peaceful civilians, of supporting the rebels. This made the general population view their Tutsi neighbors with suspicion and fear. Despite intense fighting, both sides eventually recognized the devastating impact of ongoing conflict. By 1993, under international pressure, President Habyarimana's government and the RPF signed the Arusha Peace Accords. This agreement aimed to end the war, allow Tutsi refugees to return, and create a power-sharing government where both Hutu and Tutsi would have political representation. Unfortunately, rather than bringing peace, the accords terrified Hutu extremists within the government. These extremists saw power sharing as a threat. They believed that giving Tutsis political power would endanger their own dominance. Instead of accepting a peaceful solution, they secretly began planning a horrific campaign of violence aimed at eliminating all Tutsis and moderate Hutus who supported cooperation. This planning involved not only government officials and military leaders, but also ordinary citizens. Lists of Tutsi names and addresses were compiled. Secretly, weapons such as machetes, clubs, and spears were stockpiled across the country. Local militias were trained by the government's army. One of these militias, known as the Interahamwe, meaning those who fight together, would later become notorious for their cruelty. To spread their message of hatred, extremists created a powerful propaganda tool, the radio station Radio Télévision Libre de Mille Collines, or RTLM. Established in 1993, RTLM broadcast constant messages calling Tutsis cockroaches, pests to be exterminated. The station convinced ordinary citizens that it was their duty to protect Rwanda by killing their Tutsi neighbors. Tragically, many people who listened believed these lies. Even with clear signs of growing danger, the international community largely ignored the warnings. The United Nations had peacekeepers stationed in Rwanda to support the Arusha Accords, but these forces were small and had very limited powers. When General Romeo Dallaire, the commander of the UN peacekeepers, discovered the extremists' plans and asked for additional help, his warnings were dismissed by the UN Security Council. Everything finally erupted on April 6, 1994. The airplane carrying President Habyarimana was shot down as it approached Rwanda's capital, Kigali. To this day, nobody is certain who was responsible, but that night became the turning point. Within hours, extremists seized control, blaming the Tutsi for the president's death and ordering immediate violence. The killing started immediately in the capital city, Kigali. Militias and soldiers set up roadblocks and checkpoints throughout the city, checking identity cards to identify Tutsis. Neighbors turned against neighbors. People who had lived side by side peacefully for years suddenly became murderers and victims overnight. Ordinary people were dragged from their homes into the streets, where they were brutally attacked, often with nothing more than machetes and clubs. The violence was not random, it was meticulously organized. Extremist militias, especially the Interahamwe, moved systematically from neighborhood to neighborhood, hunting down their targets. Tragically, these militias often included everyday citizens who had been convinced by propaganda to see Tutsis as dangerous enemies rather than human beings. People who refused to join the killings were often killed themselves, forcing many into terrifying complicity. The genocide quickly spread far beyond Kigali into rural areas across Rwanda. One horrifying tactic used by the killers was to deceive victims into gathering in places where they believed they would be safe, such as churches, schools, and community centers. Once trapped inside, these innocent men, women, and children were brutally massacred. One heartbreaking example is the Nyamata Catholic Church, where thousands of Tutsis took shelter. Instead of protection, they faced horrific violence as militias attacked and killed nearly everyone inside. One of the most disturbing aspects of the genocide was the way violence was carried out. The attackers used simple weapons like machetes, clubs, and spears rather than guns or explosives. This made the violence intensely personal, cruel, and psychologically damaging. The killings were not just quick acts of violence, they were deliberate, prolonged, and designed to cause maximum suffering. At the heart of this horror was the relentless propaganda from Radio Télévision Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM. This radio station, broadcasting day and night, called openly for murder, constantly telling listeners to hunt down and eliminate Tutsis. RTLM even gave out names, addresses, and locations of people to be targeted, turning ordinary citizens into killers. The station repeatedly used dehumanizing language, calling Tutsis cockroaches, and instructing listeners that exterminating them was necessary for Rwanda's survival. Women suffered immensely during this time. Sexual violence was deliberately used as a weapon of genocide. Militias targeted Tutsi women systematically, committing horrific assaults to spread fear and humiliation. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of women endured these atrocities, leaving survivors with severe physical injuries, psychological trauma, and lasting social stigma. Children were not spared either. The attackers believed they had to eliminate the next generation of Tutsis completely. Tragically, children became direct targets. Families were often killed together, ensuring there would be no survivors left to tell their stories or rebuild their communities. In just 100 days, Rwanda experienced the fastest mass killing in modern history. Estimates suggest that between 500,000 and 1 million people lost their lives during this short period. The speed and intensity of the killing were unprecedented, surpassing even some of the darkest moments in human history, such as the Holocaust, in terms of how quickly lives were taken. While the genocide spread, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, the rebel group led mainly by Tutsi refugees, intensified their fight against the government forces. The RPF gradually gained territory, fighting fiercely to end the killing. By mid-July 1994, after approximately 3 months of brutal fighting, the RPF succeeded in capturing Kigali and most of Rwanda. Their victory finally ended the mass killings, but it also triggered a new humanitarian crisis. In fear of revenge from the RPF, more than 2 million Hutus, including many who had participated in the genocide, fled to neighboring countries, particularly to Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. These massive refugee movements created huge humanitarian challenges, as refugee camps quickly became overcrowded, poorly managed, and dangerous. Diseases like cholera spread rapidly, leading to thousands more deaths. Many of the perpetrators managed to escape justice by hiding among innocent refugees, complicating efforts to hold people accountable for their actions. This escape allowed extremist leaders and militias to regroup and continue to cause instability in neighboring countries for many years afterward. The genocide left Rwanda utterly devastated. Families were destroyed, communities shattered, and trust among neighbors broken forever. The violence tore apart Rwanda's social fabric, leaving survivors with unimaginable trauma and grief. Entire towns and villages were left abandoned, littered with evidence of the cruelty and violence that had taken place. The international community faced harsh criticism for its inaction and failure to respond effectively. While the world promised never again after previous atrocities like the Holocaust, Rwanda revealed just how little had changed. The genocide forced many nations to reconsider their responsibilities and to reflect deeply on what happens when hatred is allowed to flourish unchecked. Rwanda's genocide serves as a stark and painful reminder of humanity's darkest capabilities when hatred, propaganda, and indifference combine. Yet, even amid such horror, survivors and the world began asking critical questions. How could such atrocities be prevented in the future? And how could Rwanda possibly heal from such profound tragedy?